I was born and raised in New York City, in Manhattan. I lived in Washington Heights all my life, probably the first 21 years there. And my mother was a seamstress. So my mother was the head of household. She was the sole breadwinner. And I also came from a family of 3 children, but I was the baby. And we were all 10 and 19 years apart. So my sister was 19 years older than I was, and my brother was 10 years older than I was. So we were like really 3 separate families. By the time I was 3, my sister had been married and moved back to Puerto Rico, which is where my parents were born and lived. And so for me, I came to Michigan by a fluke, really. You know, I was never, I had friends and relatives here, and they had come. Their kids had come to do a spring break in New York, and so they talked about, why don't you come to Michigan and go to Michigan State? Well, at that time, I was like in my junior year of college, and I said, oh, well, let me see. And so I came up for a visit. And for me, coming from New York City and coming to Lansing, which may be considered a big city to a little city, but the fact that I could look around the city and not see tall skyscrapers was amazing to me at that time, and this was in the early 70s, or that people would park their cars and not lock them, or that there was a lot of green grass. And even though I noticed that there was poverty in this community, it is different when poverty is a house next to another. I grew up in a tenement, literally, so that poverty was around you, above you, below you, because that's how you lived in a high-rise kind of a thing. And so for me, poverty in Lansing was very different. It was almost like if you wanted to be poor, this would be the best place to be poor. And it sounds silly, but from my perspective at that time, it was amazing. And so I was very fortunate that I applied as a transfer student, and I came to Michigan State. So I left my mother and father, and of course, my sister and their husband were thinking about coming to Michigan because Puerto Rican girls are just not let to go unless you were married. So luckily, my sister was coming to Michigan, and so I was allowed to come up. And so it was really great. I had studied, my undergraduate work was in industrial psychology because I wanted to be an efficiency expert. I don't know why. So I finished my degree here at MSU. And I was very fortunate that when I did my year of study here, I was able to get a position as a work-study student. It was wonderful. And I got a work-study student with model cities of all kind of programs, a very community-based, oriented federal program that looked at giving grants to the community or nonprofits or even creating some of them to address community issues. So I worked there for about a year as a work-study student. I graduated MSU, and they had another wonderful federal program at Model Cities called CETA, which was like an employment program. So here I was graduating college back then. To earn $12,000 a year was hot money. I was great with an undergraduate degree. I would hate for students to think about that was making it today. So I was able to stay on as an employee, and I worked at that point in time. The Model Cities program in Lansing had just received a major federal grant, transportation grant. So we were trying out propane and electric buses in our community. Some of them, and we were also trying to see is how we could take sort of smaller neighborhoods and combine sort of these feeder buses to bring them into the main bus line so that people could really get around the city. And also using propane and electric buses, look at the environmental impacts. And so I worked with the project to kind of kick it off there. And after a while, I really enjoyed it. It might be silly, but we used to ride, sometimes people would say, these buses just go around in circles. And they were missing the point that, yes, it was a circle in a neighborhood because we were trying to get you from different points to a main feeder line for the regular transportation system in the city. A lot of people didn't get it. So I spent a couple of years doing that, and then I stayed on with Model Cities. I worked for the city for 9 years. So I worked as what you would consider today probably a program officer with a portfolio of federally funded sub-programs that we funded. And then I also moved into the division on evaluation, so we were looking at the success and the impacts that the programs that we funded had. And so I was doing that for 9 years when we were able to get a small grant from the state to establish a women's bureau in Lansing. And so Jacqueline Warren, which was the head of the Model Cities program in Lansing, said, do you want to start this? You want to work on this? And so I did. And so we did that program for about 3 years. I stayed with it for about 1.5 years. And we did a lot of work at that point in time in history in our country. There was a lot of legislation about displaced homemakers. So those were individuals that had been in marriages for many, many years, and now were finding themselves divorced and really had never spent any time really working in the world of work, but had done a lot of volunteer and community organizing in their own right. And we were helping them take those skills and put it in a resume so that they can present themselves to a potential employer. So we were really excited about the work that we did then. And so from the Women's Bureau, I ended up seeing another ad in the paper. God, these articles. And it was to be the director of women's programs at MSU. And so I applied, and I was sort of taken back that I was selected. And I spent 9 years doing women's programming at Michigan State University until Campus Compact, and then the commission, and then the corporation. And so that's sort of been my track. So really, I did an undergraduate in industrial psychology. I worked on a master's, and I got my master's in labor and industrial relations and employee relations. And I never did a day's work in either of those fields. But I do think that I met great faculty members at MSU that kind of made me think about sort of, and you deal with, in labor, you see the work of unions and the impact that they've had on the work and the worker in our state, especially Michigan has always been a strong union state. But I also, it gave me an appreciation too, working in model cities and stuff like that, of the fact that local communities have a voice, and that voice is critical to addressing what they really want in their communities. And so for me, it opened up a way to say, you know what, we need to listen more, as I said earlier. And how do we take what they're saying and their dreams and try to bring it to some level of fruition, however you can do that. I would encourage them to take as many opportunities, or many, I don't want to say chances because that's not exactly the word, but to open themselves up to a lot of no, that's not the word either. I'm sorry. Let me make sure that I have the right word. I want them to be willing to take chances. I think that's one of the things that I was very willing to do all my life. And I don't necessarily come from a background with a mother who took chances. She believed that you worked one job all your life, kind of a thing. And so for me, I was never afraid to take a chance. But I was also an individual that was willing to say, you know what, I don't know that. I need to read more about that, or I need to talk to some more people about that before I say I think I know that. And so I think I would encourage young people to say that you should be very proud to say, I don't know. I think we have a society right now that no one wants to say they don't know. They're willing to say they know everything, and they really don't. Or they're willing sometimes to sort of disparage those that have been before them that have many years of experience because they know it better. We have a better way to do that. And nothing wrong with having new ways to do things. I think that's what makes everything so exciting. But I do think that they need to take time to understand sort of the historical perspective. I think people who don't understand our history and don't understand sort of who the key leaders in our state were to move us to where we are today will miss a lot. I think all our young people should strive first and foremost to be a servant first and a leader second in whatever work they do, regardless of where you are. I think you need to serve others. And I think for me, that is critical. And to be willing to learn more every day. You should never think that you've learned all you can learn because you have so many degrees or because you've worked so much. I think that's important. Surround themselves with books, I think is important. Read all you can, whether it's on your Nook or iPad or Kindle. But books are really good to touch and to feel and to turn the page, I think. And I have both, but I do think it's important. And not to be afraid to say I don't know, and not to be afraid to fail. We all must fail if we're going to succeed. I don't think there's anybody who has been successful in life that can't go back and say, you know what, I learned from my mistakes, and I learned from the times I stumbled, or I learned from the times that I was challenged. And so for me, I think those are some of the key points that I would make with people. And finally, I would say to any of them who have a group of individuals that are working for them, that one of the things that I pride myself is that if your staff succeed, it is their success. If your staff fails, it is your problem. And I think that's critical to me. If something doesn't work, then I did something wrong. Not my staff did something wrong, I did something wrong. I didn't guide them appropriately. And if we were successful, then it was their work that brought the success about, because that's the only way that we succeed. So that to me is critical, something that I think I try to instill in the staff that I'm very fortunate to be able to work closely with today. Well, one of the things that I've always noticed too is, and I think we're seeing a little bit more about this happening more recently right now, but I do think that the philanthropic world in Michigan and nationwide needs to begin to look like the communities that we're serving, all right? And that's from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And it's work that the Council of Michigan Foundations is working on, and M&A is very fortunate to be part of that work. But I do think that it just can't happen. You have to work at making it happen. You need to engage young people in the field that might be running programs to expose them to the opportunities of what it is to be in the philanthropic community, to do the work that philanthropic communities do, because I think individuals may not understand that, and that's my take on it. I'm older, that's what I sense. Now, we do have a lot of young people that are in philanthropy around the country, but I also think that they're few and far between. And I think if we in Michigan are going to be attentive to what our community's needs are, then we need to have people reaching out to those communities that look like them, that understand them, that, and it's not to say that a person of a different race or color can't do that, but you know, if you're going to be in a Hispanic community, it's important to see people that are Hispanic kind of understanding your issues, because some of them may have been brought up in those same issues, okay? And I think that's that's the one thing that I'm really a little, not concerned so much because I see the work we're doing now, but I'm a little anxious because I want it to happen right away, and it's not something that happens overnight. But I think we do need to be deliberate. Our community foundations, which is where the first step could be, need to look at themselves and say, how do I engage individuals that are different than who we have right now? And how do I engage young people in my youth advisory councils that don't all look the same or come from the same economic background? I need to bring more individuals with different thoughts and different upbringings. I think that will enrich the Michigan philanthropy and enrich the work that we'll be able to do in our communities moving forward.